What worries me is that it's not going to slow down. It's only going to get worse because if you look at the impact that the disinformation campaigns have had, there's a great paper done by the MITRE Corporation. It's called the Disinformation Kill Chain. And they have a lot of case studies in there of some very successful disinformation campaigns. And so the trend is not that it's dying off, it's that it's actually ramping up. That obviously scares me a little bit because I think we've got a lot of work to do here in the United States to really sort of catch up.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Life Raft Security Conversation Series. I'm your host, Robert Value, and today I'm joined by the CEO of Echo Analytics Group, Buddy Jericho. Our conversation today covers digital disinformation and the impact these campaigns can have on corporate security. But first, a little bit about Buddy. As I mentioned, he's the CEO and founder of Echo Analytics Group, an OSINT training and research company. Prior to that, he served on the ground during the conflicts in Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And within the intelligence community, he's widely considered an expert on combating Islamic extremism. Buddy, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Robert. Before we get started, obviously, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Thank you.
You gave a recent speech at Osmosis about digital disinformation. What got you interested in that topic in particular?
So prior to getting involved in the open source information space, which is now referred to as OSINT, I worked in the intelligence arena, but mostly as a human intelligence person. And so it became very apparent to me in 2007 with the advent of things like Twitter and Facebook taking off, or MySpace kind of dying off and Facebook starting, in engaging with our adversaries and really kind of studying our enemies overseas. It became apparent that them leveraging online to further, not only in the case of Al-Qaeda in furthering the caliphate, but also just the idea that the United States as a whole is such a target-rich environment and so susceptible to mis and disinformation. I sort of hung up my intel career doing this stuff on the ground and realized that the new battlefield was really going to occur online. And it's a calculated move on their part, really, because there's a lot less risk. Going into battle with guns and vehicles and ISR platforms, we've proven that we can do that very well as a government. The enemy has realized, our adversaries have realized they're not very good at combating that. And in the online space, the risk is significantly reduced on their behalf. And so their transition to that new battlefield is really what motivated me to basically follow them into this new space. That's kind of how we got started. And we track a lot of these disinformation campaigns online. Some we stumble across, some we intentionally watch because we know they're going to happen. And just the amount of money that's spent on these campaigns by our adversary, the amount of money lost by small businesses in America and our government is incredible. And so that's an area where we see there's opportunity for a lot of improvement. And as a business, obviously, there's a pretty interesting space for us to grow into because, frankly, this terrain is completely new for us in the government and in the private sector.
It's a very interesting explanation. So maybe take a step back now and just say, for maybe someone who's less familiar, I think people have an idea of what disinformation is, but why don't we just define it for someone who might not be as familiar as you are in the field?
Yeah, absolutely. So misinformation, just to be clear, because they are two very different and distinct things. Misinformation, for example, is if you were to share a post that you didn't really read into, so you're unintentionally sharing lies or false information. But it's not intentional. You read a headline. We have confirmation biases as human beings. And so we reshare stuff because it aligns with what our preconceived thoughts are. So that's misinformation.
The emails that you get from Uncle Joe, forward, check this out, kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it, Robert. But disinformation is dangerous. And that is when information is intentionally created to mislead and cause harm or to change civil discourse. And so disinformation is an intentional act by a person or an entity to essentially mislead the public.
So who are the people behind these campaigns? Because that's sometimes I think that's sort of shadowy. We kind of know we're seeing weird stuff online when we're engaging on social media. And we know we can't always trust what we're seeing. But I sometimes don't always understand who are the people behind this, what their motivations are. What's kind of the background on that?
That's a great point. It's very complex because I tell people all the time, when I was a kid and growing up, there were 3 news stations that we listened to in our house, 3 channels. And essentially what was said on those news channels kind of shaped how I thought. And then my parents' opinion on that information kind of drove how I thought about certain things. And then as I got older, I kind of had to reshape how I understood things. And I think everybody goes through that experience. With social media, though, we've kind of put all that on its head, right? And so a 14-year-old kid in the Philippines can now tell his story to the world. And so the idea of sharing information by pretty much anybody on planet Earth now gives everybody the ability to spread this information. And so to say that there's like one actor or one nation state actor doing it would not be true. I mean, everybody is sharing disinformation. The challenge on our part, though, is to identify who's putting the most money behind these disinformation campaigns and having the most impact. And from our perspective right now, it's absolutely some of our largest adversaries, like the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians. They're investing a significant amount of money in disinformation campaigns. And to sort of give you an example, there's a thing called the Internet Research Agency and just outside of Moscow in St. Petersburg, and they moved the location, but that is an agency that is sole focus and primary intent is building US-based accounts and spreading disinformation campaigns. And as I mentioned, we're a target-rich environment, so it's real easy to identify flashpoints across the US and then embellish those or inflame those or amplify those very quickly through ad spend. So disinformation, I think, is coming from all angles. It's really just figuring out which of those disinformation campaigns are most impactful and have the most amount of money behind them.
All right. There was a few things I was noting down there as we were talking, so we can go in different angles. But one of the points that you made there was just saying we're a target-rich environment as a society. So I kind of want, what exactly do you mean by that?
We're an open society, right? So Americans are very used to sharing their feelings online. We share information, for instance, like police records, county records, tax records. I mean, we share everything here in America. A lot of other governments don't do that. And in some cases, it's not that they don't do it intentionally. It's that they don't have the infrastructure to really share that information, right? So there's that. But because we offer so much information to the public, because of the way we are as a country, it's very easy for bad actors to really sort of identify vulnerable population sets in America, whether it's low-income housing areas, whether it's people susceptible to certain messages. That information is very easy to discover in America. And so when those things blow up, or when an incident occurs in pick a city in America and it's getting even a little bit of attention, it's very easy to take that event and make it a bigger event than it really is. And we've got a whole bunch of those things occurring every day. So what I mean by target rich is any adversary can really sit back and sort of scour the digital landscape and look for an event that's occurred and then amplify that event. And there's probably thousands of those opportunities every single day in America.
Right, 350 million people, something headline where it's going to happen all the time.
And we're all online. That's exactly it, Robert. And everybody's online, right? And so that makes us a very target-rich environment.
What's one of your favorite examples of one of these types of disinformation campaigns?
There's been so many. Without getting into names and so forth, there was an event that happened about 1.5 years ago in New York. This was a well-thought-out campaign on behalf of our adversaries. Now, I don't know exactly who did it. It was tracked back to some accounts in Turkey and South America. So I believe they were probably using IP addresses and moving their IP addresses around. But they actually engaged a well-known person here in the United States. And in that engagement, they talked about an incident that happened with the police in California. So they identified this event that happened in California, and then they took some sock puppet accounts, and they used those sock puppet accounts that were already inside of a network. And then they started engaging a person who we would call a key interlocutor, right? And they knew that it hit at the heartstrings of that individual. And so they started to engage this person online, and eventually they got to the point where they proposed that, hey, we should do a protest in New York specifically about this event. And they actually launched a hashtag for it. And they did this really nice graphic. They probably bought it off of Fiverr, but it was a really nice graphic that advertised this meeting. And so this person they were engaging, that was a well-known person in American politics, got behind it, and then he shared it. And then his network, because we tracked this using a tool like Twitonomy and Hashtagify, we could see how many people immediately started to share that tweet about this protest that was going to occur in New York. 3 weeks later, I think it was about 3 weeks later, this protest occurs. Hundreds of people show up. Thousands to millions of people are online talking about this. Well, that whole event was created by an account coming out of Russia. They took an event in California. They embellished it a little bit. They turned some half-truths, and then they targeted the exact people that they were most susceptible to that message in America. They launched a campaign to market the protest, and then we, as the American people, kind of took it from there and created this major event. I'm not saying it was a bad thing or it was a good thing that occurred in the U.S., but that's what they're very good at. They're very good at taking small instances, making them worse than they are, amplifying them, and then creating these sort of events. And so, yeah, that protest went on for about 8 hours in New York, sucked up a whole bunch of police resources, got a lot of attention online. And so for that account, that sock puppet account that was created, that probably took about 2 or 3 hours to build and maybe a couple of days to season, that probably cost the U.S. government hundreds of thousands of dollars in labor, resources, so forth and so on. So it's those little events where a disinformation campaign can go from a sock puppet account to costing the U.S. government a lot of money. And the intangible there is it's feeding people's preconceived notions of what the American government is and isn't, both the good and bad sides of it. And so you can't really measure the level of impact that has, but clearly it's significant.
As you're kind of describing the tactics, I'm thinking like cost benefit there for any adversary. It's setting up some accounts through a VPN and couple hours worth of work, and it's probably maybe a few $100 with some targeted ads with no risk to them, and the cost to the American government's off the charts.
Oh, absolutely. And I actually was, there's an individual that, as an intelligence person, I did some interrogations in my previous life. And I had the ability to meet with some people that were pretty high level. And it was very simple to them. And I'd ask them all the time, like, why are you not attacking this anymore? Why are we not getting these gunfights and seeing these things we used to? And this individual told me very clearly, he said, it's very simple. When we set up an ambush or attack one of your convoys, we might pop a tire and break a windshield, but in return, we lose 6 to 7 people from our group. They said, so the math, that's not a long-term strategy for us. And so he said, it's so much easier to take the battle to America online, and it's a lot less risk. So it's pretty simple when you think about it from that perspective. And so I think our adversaries in a lot of ways have doubled down on spending in the digital domain because the risk is so much less. And I don't know, it's arguable about the level of success that they're having, but I think if you look back over the past 2 years, regardless of your political beliefs or what your experiences are, I certainly feel like the United States has become a little bit more unstable. And I think these campaigns have had a significant impact on that.
Well, I think too, with the cyber attacks that we saw with like Colonial Pipeline and stuff, and then starting to realize that we're kind of used as a society in North America, the conflicts are far away in the Middle East or in Asia or in Africa. Well, with the internet, they're here, and the propaganda campaigns are starting to be here, whether it's a pipeline, whether it's disinformation that we're seeing online, which is kind of a new reality that I don't think a lot of people are quite used to in that sense.
Well, exactly. And I think, too, the other thing that we're seeing, I think most people that have been in the OSINT space and law enforcement have seen this for a while and you sort of get this. OSINT, in my opinion, is very complementary to countering cyber attacks because I think about OSINT as it relates to these cyber attacks like the Colonial Pipeline. It is a very good long-range reconnaissance tool. We were to speak in military terms. So with OSINT, it's very easy for me to identify like the line and block chart of any company and identify what their vulnerabilities are. What are they doing on Tinder? What are they doing on the dark web? And so OSINT feeds and informs a lot of these cyber attacks that we're seeing. And so that's one thing I'd like to see more in our community. I think OSINT and cybersecurity folks, they haven't really come together as much as they should, I think. And I would love to see over the next couple of years, and that's part of the direction we're taking our company, is I do believe we got to bring those two things together because our adversaries and bad actors, even here and criminals in the United States, are absolutely using both of those capabilities to be successful. And I think until the good guys start doing that, we're going to be behind the power curve.
Just turning back to the disinformation stuff specifically, for maybe someone in more of a corporate environment, what are the kind of risks that digital disinformation plays for maybe a large business?
Yeah, I think there's a couple, but these are well-planned efforts, right? And so if I were to sort of red team this, right, look at this from the adversary's lens, if I wanted to take down a big company, like a Fortune 5 business or a Fortune 100 business, and I knew what areas they were expanding into or where they're trying to build new facilities and infrastructure, as an adversary, I know that the thing that keeps America growing and thriving is small and medium-sized businesses across our country, right? Everybody knows that's sort of the backbone of America. Most small business owners and medium-sized business owners, a lot of the decisions made at those levels are a result of what comes out of Washington, D.C., or tax laws that are going to be put in place, or where the next administration is thinking about going in regards to regulations. Well, attacking those from a disinformation campaign can cause a lot of confusion for small and medium-sized business owners. And to me, that creates fear. And when you have fear, it's harder to make decisions. It's harder to live the American dream, which is all about taking risks, right? Our forefathers were onto something in America when they got away from debtor's prison and came up with this awesome thing called bankruptcy. Because we wanted to, as a society, we wanted to embrace failure. And as long as you're legal and ethical, you get a second chance in this country. Our adversaries understand that that's the backbone of America. And so even twisting politicians' words or giving a spin on some regulatory guidance from the IRS really, really impacts our small to medium-sized businesses in America. That's from a government perspective. But at the civil level, it's really, really easy to affect a company's brand reputation through disinformation. And so I wouldn't say that there's one or two ways they're doing it. I think anybody that's creative and doing this deliberately can take a step back. And if small and medium-sized businesses is your target in America, this information is probably one of your most powerful tools today.
I like that point that you made about just the foundational fabric of our society. Like we're looking through social media right now like a funhouse mirror with all these different campaigns. So no one knows what's going on. It's really hard to have a functional democracy.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Robert. And these disinformation campaigns control our news cycles sometimes, right? And so even if the business owner is not on social media, I'm sure a lot of small to medium-sized business owners and they're entrepreneurs and they're busy every day. If they're on Twitter, it's probably to talk about the business. They're probably not reading the news around them. But that information that's spread on Twitter and Facebook and some of these leading platforms That's what drives a lot of the news cycles in America. And that is what the small and medium-sized business owners are tuned into, right? The Fox Newses, the MSNBCs, and CNNs of the world. But a lot of that news cycle is also driven by social media. So they might not be directly engaging with the disinformation on the social media platforms, but it's absolutely reaching through the news channels. And so there's a lot of different ways, I think, that small and medium-sized businesses are impacted.
Why don't you think digital disinformation isn't the main focus that maybe it should be?
Well, see, maybe it is, right? And I get that question a lot. But what are some of the things most Americans have been talking about at the dinner table for the past 2 years? It's politics. It's the economy. All of those things are highly susceptible to disinformation campaigns. And so do you really think we own the narrative on all those talking points? And so it's, like I said, it's not like a Russian or an adversarial actor is going to start an account and you're going to see that this is a Russian guy posing disinformation, right? It's a lot more deliberate and intricate than that. And so the fact that we think about this in America for the past year, politics has been on the top of a lot of people's minds. We stopped talking about the wars in Iraq. We stopped talking about the wars in Afghanistan. We stopped talking about the expansion of ISIS into Africa. Not many people in America really know what's been going on in Hong Kong. And so to me, that's a successful disinformation campaign. They forced us as Americans to focus on domestic issues and overwhelm ourselves with them so that we don't, in some cases, we're not paying as much attention to what's happening outside of our borders. And so to me, those are the results of successful disinformation.
That's an interesting point. That's right. We're only thinking internally at the moment.
No, I mean, and even some of the issues with immigration at the border. Everybody knows about it. It's kind of a big deal, but that's taken a backseat to some other issues that are probably much more important to our national security. That's the result of successful disinformation campaigns. Controlling where you focus your time and effort is exactly what a disinformation campaign is designed to do, to basically drive that narrative.
Very interesting. How do we and we could take this in a few different ways, how do we as like OSINT analysts get better at identifying disinformation campaigns? Because you talk a lot about this, and especially in your talk about developing those critical thinking skills, which I thought was really interesting. What's your insight on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways to really attack this. What I see as a problem, maybe some people don't, but I do kind of see it that way. And I think I mentioned this in the talk, but the amount of data that our kids are exposed to now is through the roof, right? I mean, the average kid is exposed to more data in 2 or 3 days right now than like an adult in their entire lifetime prior to 1960. That's a big deal. I mean, that's hard to even fathom, right? And so I think one of the things we got to get better at as a community, just in America, not necessarily as OSINTers, is teaching media literacy in our schools, understanding how to read an article, how to spot false information. Until we really start to educate our children on these things, we're going to continue to be very susceptible to these campaigns. And the thing, too, is our adversaries looking at our kids. Our kids are most susceptible to this stuff. And they're the ones looking at TikTok all day. They're the ones swiping left and right on all these social media channels. And so the amount of data that is building impressions in their little minds is going to come back to haunt us in the future. And it's already shaping how they think about things. As OSINTers, though, I think we've got to get back to the basics in terms of really respecting the art of critical thinking. And most intelligence disciplines teach you this at a very young stage. OSINT has kind of emerged so quickly that there hasn't been too much of a foundational effort to build what a real OSINT analyst looks like. And so I think there need to be courses that really start to focus on critical thinking, understand human biases, things along those lines, because even as OSINT analysts, the definition of an OSINT analyst is different in the federal government, it's different in law enforcement, it's different in the private sector. And so as a community, I think we kind of got to come together and really define what OSINT is. And then kind of like they've done with artificial intelligence and Elon Musk's foundation, I think we really got to build a board for the ethical use of OSINT so people get more comfortable with it and understand that it's not Big Brother. Most OSINTers are out there trying to do the right thing to protect the American people and our national security. OSINT, because of the int at the end, I think has a bad name in a lot of places.
What are some of the mistakes that seem to trip people up the most?
Yes. So it goes back to forming your research question as an OSINTer. If you go into your research with a preconceived notion of what you think you're going to find, that's not intelligence anymore, right? That's a journey of confirmation bias. And so I think a lot of mistakes are made without having a proper research and collection plan when doing open source intelligence, meaning that we've got to be open to learning from the environment, right? Learning from what people are talking about and collect that information to eliminate as much bias in our research as possible, I guess is the point I'm making there. But most of the mistakes I see is a Twitter post is not OSINT, right? A Facebook post is not OSINT. OSINT, at least as we define it here with my company, is you start with a research question. That research fills an information gap for a business, for law enforcement, or the government. And then you build a plan to find the data that helps satisfy that requirement. And all information sources are just that, whether it's coming from social media, whether it's coming from print media, white papers, the dark web. whatever falls under the umbrella of OSINT. The gathering of all that information is still not OSINT. It's when the gathering of that information is narrowed down to where it satisfies that information requirement or that research question you started with. To me, that's when it's actually OSINT. So OSINT is the end state of it. OSINT isn't an act. OSINT is the end state of collecting information. And so at least that's how we define it. So when you say, like, what are some of the mistakes people have potentially made, I think it's not really understanding what OSINT is. And like I said, finding a tweet or a Facebook post doesn't mean you're doing OSINT. That means you're reading social media.
What would be an example of like a bad research question? And then how would you maybe fix that and have a good research question?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways to form research questions, and how you form that research question is different for the intelligence community versus law enforcement and obviously the commercial space. And so Arnon actually gives a really good class on this for your listeners. He's developed a really good one-pager that helps you really define what that question is. I could get into it, but it's going to take about 10 minutes to explain it. But I will tell you that a good research question is specific, measurable, and obtainable based on your resources. And it's got to be very, very specific. A research question like, what's going to happen in Hong Kong if China takes over? That's not a very good research question, right? A better question might be, what will the people of a specific district of a specific income level that oppose or support the government do if China makes this decision, right? And I know that's kind of vague, but that's a much more specific question. There's a lot of classes out there on it. But yeah, starting with a bad research question could really derail your research or your ability to answer a question.
With regards to this digital disinformation campaign, what are the big trends that kind of worry you going forward?
What worries me is that it's not going to slow down. It's only going to get worse, because if you look at the impact that the disinformation campaigns have had, there's a great paper done by the MITRE Corporation. It's called the Disinformation Kill Chain. And they have a lot of case studies in there of some very successful disinformation campaigns. And so the trend is not that it's dying off, it's that it's actually ramping up. That obviously scares me a little bit, because I think we've got a lot of work to do here in the United States to really sort of catch up. Secondly, is we are becoming, as we enter into these echo chambers online, when we surround ourselves with like-minded people, we become much more susceptible to these disinformation campaigns. And so I think if we continue to be divided here in America, if we continue to move into these echo chambers and not have open dialogue and be humble and susceptible to ideas that differ from our own, if we don't continue that critical thinking, we're going to become very malleable to these things, and they're only going to get worse. And so that scares me a little bit too, because I think a friend once told me that you want to become a millionaire in the United States, make an American's life just a little bit easier, right? And so we've seen technologies of that over the past 20 years. And I fear that our laziness and the ease with which we can arrive at conclusions, because there's always somebody out there that believes what we believe, and we mold into those echo chambers, that's going to make us more susceptible to these disinformation campaigns.
We're coming up to the end of all the time I promised to take from you today. Why don't you just tell our audience a little bit about some of the work that you're doing at Echo Analytics?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Robert. So Echo Analytics Group, I think we mentioned it earlier, we've been in business about 6 years. We were acquired in January. But our dream really as a company has been to bring in-house technology, instructors, and analysts. And so we're building the 7th floor here in our building. By the way, you're more than welcome to attend our ribbon cutting on December 3rd, Robert, if you'd like to.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, in our new space, we've got 16,000 square feet. We've opened up a watch center there. We've got state-of-the-art classrooms, and then we've got a whole team of technologists in there. And my dream of this whole space is we're launching the very first, at least that I know of, I could be wrong, but the very first OSINT cafe. And my dream is that as our analysts sit in our ops center and do work for our public and private sector clients, and they come across these challenges, they can very quickly link up with our technologists to build a new script or a new way to get after an API, figure out what that tactic, technique, and procedure is based on that hard problem they have, and then we can immediately put that into our program of instruction in our coursework. And I do believe that if we're going to counter disinformation campaigns or leverage OSINT for good, it requires that kind of setup and that kind of thinking to keep us ahead of what the bad guys are doing. It's a pretty awesome thing. We're excited about it. We're just trying to build capability that enables the good guys to get ahead of the bad guys. That's really what the 7th floor is all about. But you need all those different skill sets to do that.
That's really cool. And where would be the best way to get in touch with you?
Sure. Anybody can reach us on our website, www.echoanalyticsgroup.com, or just shoot us an email at info@echoanalyticsgroup.com.
All right, Buddy. Thanks again for being on the show. Again, that was Buddy Jericho, CEO of Echo Analytics Group. Thanks again for listening to another edition of the LifeRaft Security Conversation Series. If you'd like more insights on how to use OSINT to safeguard your company's people and operations, be sure to check out our website at liferaftinc.com/resources. That's lifegraphinc.com/resources. Hope you tune in next time.